There is a debate around the use of solitary confinement in prisons. And this week, the federal government gave its response in light of the death of prisoner Ashley Smith in 2007. She died of self-inflicted strangulation. Ottawa has decided not to place limits on how long a prisoner can remain in solitary, which means being locked alone for 22 or 23 hours a day. Howard Sapers is the federal prison ombudsman, and we've reached him in Ottawa. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
What do you think of the government's decision?
Well, they certainly could have taken more significant steps. Many people, including my office, have made recommendations that the use of segregation should be reduced or even eliminated for certain offenders, particularly offenders with a significant mental disorder or those with a history of self-harm or those who have had previous suicide attempts. They didn't do that. Their response has been much more timid than what we hoped for.
Why do you think that is?
Well, the Correctional Service of Canada continues to believe that segregation must remain an option for the safe operation of a penitentiary. Some segregation will probably always be used, but what we're really talking about is who is segregated, why they're segregated, for how long they're segregated, and who administers the decisions around the release from segregation.
In your view, is there a link between the use of solitary confinement and the deterioration in mental health that can lead to suicide?
Yes, and there is research that demonstrates that link. Even the research that concludes overall that segregation doesn't have a serious effect on mental health, and there is some research that comes to that conclusion. It still concludes that there is some impact, negative impact on mental health. What we find in our investigations is that even if there's a limited impact from segregation, it's when that impact is layered on top of other issues, such as an offender with an anxiety disorder or suffering from acute depression, or is experiencing some other significant loss in their life, like the death of a spouse, for example. When an offender is in those circumstances and then they're segregated, the impact of segregation can be far worse.
To what extent do you think there is a mental health crisis in Canada's prisons?
Canadian penitentiaries house the largest psychiatric populations in the country. Last year, nearly half of every federally sentenced offender received at least one mental health service. We did a one-day snapshot of women in federal custody and found that over 2/3 were on a psychotropic medication that day. There is an explosion of mental health needs in Canadian penitentiaries, and the capacity has not grown to meet those needs. It's a real challenge for the Correctional Service of Canada.
A lot of people will argue that these are prisoners, and prison is a denial of certain comforts and rights. What do you say to them?
Well, I would agree with them. Prisons are uncomfortable places, and of course, mobility and liberty are denied by virtue of the prison placement. But the law requires that the Correctional Service of Canada provide health care to the community standard. This is a basic human right, and this is something that I think Canadians cherish, is the right of access to health care. We don't sentence people to prison to suffer as a result of their illness. We sentence people to prison in the hopes that they can be rehabilitated and safely returned to the community.
So what do you think it'll take to bring about change when it comes to the use of solitary confinement?
Well, I'm hopeful that change is possible. Embedded in the response that was released yesterday were two very important things. One was the promise that there will be some new regulations put into effect by the Correctional Service of Canada around the segregation of mentally ill offenders. So when those regulations are being developed, and frankly, I'm not sure why they haven't been developed yet, but as those regulations are being developed, I'm hoping that the door on prohibiting segregation for profoundly mentally ill offenders has not been closed, that'll still be under consideration. And number two, we know that the Correctional Service of Canada is conducting what they're calling an external expert consultation, where they've promised to report on that consultation around segregation internationally to the Minister of Public Safety. So when that report lands on the minister's desk, I'm hoping again that that'll be an opportunity for a good debate that may result in some positive change.
Okay. Mr. Sapers, thank you so much.
Thank you.